Could Diddy get bail? May sound like a long shot, but is there something that could maybe change the judge's mind? Well, we're going to be speaking with the bail bondsman to the stars, Ira Judelson, about whether Diddy may get out in a rumored new bail package. He has been working with Diddy's team. Plus, what can we expect about whether the rap mogul will spend the next decade or two behind bars?
It was evident that tension was building from the moment Diddy entered the courtroom. His hands were twitching at his sides, his jaw was tight, and his face was expressionless. Packed to capacity, the courtroom sat in eerie silence. Behind plexiglass, cameras rolled silently. Every eye in the room was on him as reporters scrawled hurried notes.
Big question we're getting in the Sean Combs post-verdict world is, what's next? Right? After being convicted of 2 counts of transportation to engage in prostitution and acquitted of racketeering conspiracy and 2 counts of sex trafficking, now we ask, what is his sentence going to be on those 2 charges, the Mann Act charges? And there's also another question that we're going to address today. Could he get bail? Could he get out? You might be saying, Jesse, wait a second. He was denied bail at every turn. And you would be right, he was. Despite proposing extensive bail conditions during the course of this legal saga, including a $50 million bail package and monitoring by private security personnel, the court was not convinced. Now, by law, the defense has the burden to prove that Combs is not a flight risk or danger to the community. And given the charges, the allegations, including that he was improperly trying to contact people in the case pre-trial, he was always denied release. But then there's what happened after the verdict last week. And this is an interesting conversation. And again, we're going to be speaking with Ira Judelson in a minute, who's been working with Diddy's team on possibly getting him released. But after the verdict, the defense applied for Combs to be released from detention pending sentencing. But that request was again denied by Judge Arun Subramanian. The defense argued, look, he's no longer charged with RICO, there's no longer presumption of detention, we have his passport, there's no access to private planes, there's no criminal history, this is his first conviction, he would be a fool to mess any of this up because he was just given his life back by the jury, he wasn't convicted of the highest charges, he was facing up to life in prison, now he's not. He should be allowed to return to his property, his mansion in Florida. There'll be a $1 million bond. Now, the government argued, look, Sean Combs, he was convicted of serious charges, Mann Act violations. There was physical abuse in this case. There was prolific use and distribution of drugs. He committed crimes while under investigation, including having drugs in his hotel room when he planned to surrender to federal authorities back in September of 2024. And Judge Arun Subramanian denied the bail application, sided with the government, that these convictions on these charges by law, they trigger the mandatory detention statute, that the defense conceded Combs is violent. They conceded that at trial, quote, we own the domestic violence. That's what the defense had said. The judge also made the point that it was impossible for the defense to demonstrate that he poses no danger, particularly given his violence after the searches of his properties and when he knew he was under investigation. That's the whole Violent Jane episode, attacking Jane, one of the victims in this case. And also that the evidence at trial showed there was a years-long pattern of abuse and violence. But despite the judge denying Combs' release once again, and given that his sentencing has officially been confirmed for October 3rd,
this was not merely another court day. Rather, it was the last moment, the verdict, and the resolution to the issue that had plagued the sector for months. With the full weight of justice finally fall on one of the biggest names in music, the judge sat down and started. No softening, no hesitancy. The trial had been explosive. Witness after witness. Testimony that left people feeling deeply shaken. Financial tracks that led into the shadows and would not be overlooked, as well as videos, documents, and texts. The portrait created by the case was far darker than anyone had expected. There was a world of manipulation, intimidation, terror, and silence behind the music and the money. The judge's words were deliberate and sluggish. You've lived at the pinnacle of this business. Mr. Combs, you've established an empire, influenced music, and molded culture, but you also made others disposable in the process.
So I want to get more into this with Combs. There was a very unique bail package. And you need to tell me if it was unique. $50 million, right?
Yes.
You know, the idea of private security. It was an interesting argument because who would monitor him. It was interesting because the prosecution at one point had said it's not fair, right? He's a wealthy celebrity who's providing a bail package that other people in his similar position wouldn't be able to provide. Now, the defense was like, well, the only reason we're presenting a package like this is because of what he's accused of and his wealth and his resources. We have to address that in a certain way. The reason it's so extensive is because of his wealth and resources. That bail package that was put forward was rejected by the court. What did you make of that?
Well, at that time, the judge was looking at the RICO Act and sex trafficking. So, Puffy was looking at possibly 25 years, or more, depending on what the guidelines were based on if he was convicted. So at 55 years old, at that time, it's almost a life sentence. So, and he has a lot of wealth and he had a private plane. So the judge was looking at that. Plus, in the federal system, they look at danger to the community. Where in the state system, they're not allowed to look at that. They look at risk of flight. So I think with all the letters behind that were coming in that we were not really privy to from a lot of the alleged victims, I think the judge made a decision that, hey, this is not going to be sufficient enough. I thought that at the end, he kind of, when we brought in our private security team and we showed him who was going to be doing it, we did Sam Bankman-Fried. So we knew that, we would be completely covered on that end. And we gave him the idea of there would be no Wi-Fi in the building that we were looking at, and that he would not be able to really be able to connect with anybody but his legal team and his family. We thought at that point that maybe we had a chance, but at the end, the judge denied it, and that's where we stood. And now on this case coming forward, after the convictions, after he wasn't convicted, at the end, we didn't know what he was going to do. So, when Mark reached out to me afterwards, we started thinking about putting another bail package together.
And what is that bail package and by the way, is this a bail package that you think could be submitted again, even after the judge just denied bail?
Well, the judge denied bail based on the statute, and the statute stated a certain amount of information that part of the Mann Act that, was not eligible for bail. There are certain circumstances that can be done. We're going to regroup again. I know that they were going to go talk to Mr. Combs again and see what happens there. They have the October 3rd date. And, I don't know where he stood. As of the other day, he wanted to get out. I don't think anybody wants to be at MDC where he is. So, we're going to reconvene and see what happens, at a later date. We could go back with another package.
Would it require him to stay in New York? Would it be him to be, I know he wanted to go back to his property.
Diddy did not flinch. The harm cannot be disregarded by the court. The evidence was overwhelming. The narrative is steady. There is no denying the weight of truth. The space slanted in. Afterward, the gavel fell. You have been sentenced to 75 years in federal prison in image strains. The persona begins to fade. They were deafening gasps. While some cried, others screamed. A number of jurors gazed straight ahead. Veteran court reporters appeared shaken as well. Within seconds, the news reached every outlet and phones buzzed. It was more than a sentence. This was the past. Did he, too? He broke. His chest heaved like a man drowning. His shoulders fell and his head lowered. He staggered to his feet and the guards intervened. He pushed his attorneys away when they attempted to support him. This was hardly a defiant response. It was the breakdown of a guy who at last understood that it was over. In one decision, his empire, his power, and decades of dominance were all lost. The courtroom was silent as he was placed in handcuffs. It was nearly too much to take in. This was more than just a demise of a celebrity. This was the harsh truth of justice at last catching up with authority.
And there's also an interesting question, I think, that his defense put forward. He just got his life back. That's what they said. He wasn't convicted of the top charges. He was convicted of transportation to engage in prostitution, but he would be a fool to try to violate any of those conditions when potentially he may get a rather lenient sentence compared to what he was facing. So 2 questions there. Do you think that it would require him to be in New York as opposed to Florida? And do you think that he'd really be in a position to violate the conditions?
First question is, I can't determine what a judge is thinking. I don't think, and this is my opinion, that the judge would let him out of the jurisdiction. I don't know. We can do private security down in Miami. We could also do private security in California, as we did with Sam Bankman-Fried. I would probably think that if the judge would think about possibly a package that he would want us to keep him here. When we first put the first package together, going a few months back, we did have an apartment here in the city that I did scout out and located a brownstone in New York that was sufficient enough, which we thought, which was one entrance in, one entrance out, for our security to be there, and no rooftop, couldn't get out from any of the windows. So we could always go back and see if that's still available. I don't know if it is or not. So I can't determine what a judge is going to think. I don't think he would let that happen if he decided to make bail, but you never know. This judge was very fair to both sides in the trial. And as far as would he want to screw up what he, after being, the convictions not coming through, I think he got to be dumb to do something like that.
Right.
He is going to possibly get his life back. I don't know what's going to happen in the music world. I don't know what's going to happen in his regular life, but he's not facing the time that he was facing before that.
And I'm going to talk about sentencing a little bit later on. The private security, right, that would monitor him 24/7. The argument could be, and this is something the prosecution's put forward, how can we trust that he's not just they're not bought and paid for, they're not really gonna watch him? If he's hiring them, there's a conflict of interest there. What's your response to that?
My team is ex-law enforcement, all gentlemen that have been involved either in the Marshal Service, FBI, police, even some CIA. So again, my people would not risk their lives on something or risk their reputation or even possibly a criminal charge on something like this. So my guys are vetted. They've been doing this a very long time. So they wouldn't jeopardize anything like that. Now, when we first talked about private security, Puffy wanted some of his people. We denied that right away. It's our guys. It's my reputation on the line here. And that's when I went to court and Tony Rico and Mark Ignifilo both stood up and said, hey, Mr. Judelson is, his reputation's on the line here. He's been doing this a long time. I've bailed out Harvey Weinstein, Conor McGregor, Plaxico Burress, Cat Williams, Lawrence Taylor. So, I'm not going to put my reputation or my license in jeopardy, for X amount of money. To me, I'm going on. I might want to turn this business over to my son one day.
Yeah, the New York Times did a profile on you called Bailing Out the Stars. How are celebrities different? How are they different from other criminal defendants?
More demanding. When you get the phone call from the lawyer or whoever, a publicist, anybody, it could happen in the middle of the night. A celebrity does not want to spend an extra minute incarcerated. And things change so drastically with, when I did Conor McGregor, he surrendered. He wanted out right away. Plaxico Burress, when that happened, we were talking, and Mayor Bloomberg was involved allegedly in the situation, and Plaxico's bail went from X to X to X. And then I'm on the phone with his agent saying, hey, I need you to send me a copy of his deed for his place in New Jersey. And
Chaos erupted outside. People screamed, supporters and protesters clashed. Vultures circled the media vans. The traffic caused social media services to falter. However, the surviving sat motionless in that courtroom. For the first time in years, some people simply breathed, some smiled, and some cried. And Diddy's eyes were empty when he turned around one final time before being escorted through those steel doors. Just fear, no bluster, no celebrity, no legacy, a man who had lost everything and was afraid. The world, aware that this moment would never be forgotten, watched it all happen. Long overdue justice had finally spoken. However, the commotion outside only intensified as the gavel hushed that courtroom. There was a flurry in the streets. Barricades were forced past by reporters. Overhead, helicopters hovered. The world watched as the guy who had previously owned the charts was broken and handcuffed as he was led into a waiting van. Reactions flooded in on social media. It was referred to as justice by some. Some referred to it as a witch hunt. But the gravity of the situation was too great for anyone to ignore. The illusion had been broken by the ruling. There would only be the harsh reality of a cell-no tour of atonement or comeback. The judge returned inside and paused before getting up from the bench. He gazed out at the faces of strangers, relatives, and victims who had come for anything other than punishment. He nodded one last time, acknowledging in silence that this was just one instance in a system of silence. However, it was a beginning. As Diddy was processed, information quickly surfaced. He wasn't sent to a detention center. He was immediately placed under federal custody. There were no chances for the feds. They were aware of the risks. They watched him all the time. Medical examinations are conducted, psychiatric evaluations are under progress, and suicide precautions are enforced. The more hours passed, the more the reality set in. Only a gray jumpsuit, steel bars, and the distant clank of closing doors remained, along with the security, the entourage, the private chef, and the tailored outfits. Prisoners looked on as he walked in. Some chuckled, some murmured, and some showed no concern. Here, fame was of little importance. It painted a target. If anything, he was kept apart by the guards. However, seclusion had its moment that rocked the courtroom. The breaking truth, quiet, your own suffering. The memories, the alone, the quiet, and the behind-the-scenes inquiries persisted.
And then with Dominic Strauss-Kahn, obviously, the world basically came to a standstill because he was the IMF, president, and nobody knew if he was on his way going back to Greece to lend him X amount of money to get him out of trouble. Yet we had to find him an apartment in the city. We had to get him private security. I was dealing with his ex-wife now, coming in and giving me what I need to put a $5 million bail together. So, they're a little more demanding, and everybody's looking to me to make that, make it happen. The lawyer could get the bail, but at the end of the day, it's Ira Jellison that's running in, putting everything together, and the pressure. And I work in chaos all day long. That's my life. So, when it comes to chaos, that's my specialty.
You handle it well, though. You handle it quite well, given the chaos.
I have to.
Yeah.
If as I said before, if I want to, have a nice home, I want my kids to go to college, I want things to happen. You got to do these things, and people rely on you.
Absolutely, and I think there's something to be said here, and it's important that you said it. Your reputation's on the line. So the idea of when we say, nebulous, how can we trust a private security team? I'm happy you clarified that. I want to get really practical here, realistically.
Sure,
Sean
yes.
Combs is released on bail. Okay, let's say he's released. He's home confinement. What exactly is he allowed to do and not to do? Is he really there's someone's going to be watching him 24/7? They're going to make sure he has no iPad, no iPhone. Can he give directions to people like associates or other people that are involved? I mean, the concern, of course, is that even if he's out and he's around people, he can still shake things up a little bit. He can still get messages out. I guess the question is, what does it realistically look like for him? Does he sit in a room? Does he only confined to certain rooms day in and day out? Is he constantly watched on tape and all of his electronic devices are searched on him constantly? I mean, what does it look like?
Well, again, it's really up to the restrictions of the court.
Sure.
I have people out right now that are on ankle bracelets, and they can't go 400 feet. They can go 800 feet. They can go wherever depending on what the restrictions are. In Puffy's case, the way we were putting it to the judge and to the Southern District was, we were going to have a call log, so you could see who his calls were going to. We were going to try to take away his Wi-Fi in the building, which would have been a lot easier. We would have limited the people that would come see him. So at the end of the day, we had cameras inside the apartment that we were going to do, which our people were going to put up. And we were going to all let the government be able to get into that system to see who was coming in and out. Of course, there's privacy. So, we were going to make it very, very tight. Now, when you're incarcerated, and I have a lot of friends that I know that that are incarcerated, when people come to see you, if you want to pass a message, messages can get passed. We know that. So if he really wanted to do something incarcerated, he might be able to. If he really wanted to do something when he was out, he might be able to. I don't think that he would take a chance on something like that to risk what he's gone through over the last year. Again, opinion on my end, based on being 30 years in the industry.
Chaos erupted outside. People screamed, supporters and protesters clashed. Vultures circled the media vans. The traffic caused social media services to falter. However, the surviving sat motionless in that courtroom. For the first time in years, some people simply breathed. Some smiled and some cried. And Diddy's eyes were empty when he turned around one final time before being escorted through those steel doors. Just fear, no bluster, no celebrity, no legacy, a man who had lost everything and was afraid. The world, aware that this moment would never be forgotten, watched it all happen. Long overdue justice had finally spoken. However, the commotion outside only intensified as the gavel hushed that courtroom. There was a flurry in the streets. Barricades were forced past by reporters. Overhead, helicopters hovered. The world watched as the guy who had previously owned the charts was broken and handcuffed as he was led into a waiting van. Reactions flooded in on social media. It was referred to as justice by some. Some referred to it as a witch hunt. But the gravity of the situation was too great for anyone to ignore. The illusion had been broken by the ruling. There would only be the harsh reality of a cell-no tour of atonement or comeback. The judge returned inside and paused before getting up from the bench. He gazed out at the faces of strangers, relatives, and victims who had come for anything other than punishment. He nodded one last time, acknowledging in silence that this was just one instance in a system of silence. However, it was a beginning. As Diddy was processed, information quickly surfaced. He wasn't sent to a detention center. He was immediately placed under federal custody. There were no chances for the feds. They were aware of the risks. They watched him all the time. Medical examinations are conducted, psychiatric evaluations are under progress, and suicide precautions are enforced. The more hours passed, the more the reality set in. Only a gray jumpsuit, steel bars, and the distant clank of closing doors remained, along with the security, the entourage, the private chef, and the tailored outfits. Prisoners looked on as he walked in. Some chuckled, some murmured, and some showed no concern. Here, fame was of little importance. It painted a target. If anything, he was kept apart by the guards. However, seclusion had its moment that rocked the courtroom. The breaking truth, quiet your own suffering. The memories, the alone, the quiet, and the behind-the-scenes inquiries persisted.